I'm Randy Reed, Executive Director of the National Lighting Bureau, and I'm here with Bryan Steverson, the Sustainability and Green Buildings Program Advisor to the USGSA. Bryan works in the Office of Federal High Performance Green Buildings. Today's session is part of our Let's Talk About Light and Health series, which is a collaboration between the NLB and Mount Sinai's Light and Health Research Center. Today's topic, hold the coffee, perking up the office with light. Bryan, welcome.
Thank you. It's great to be here.
Well, we're glad to have you. And start out by telling us a little bit about your role at GSA.
Sure. So I'll begin just by kind of explaining what GSA is and what we do. So GSA is a small independent federal agency. We do a lot of the behind the scenes work, really so that other agencies can shine and fulfill their mission. We deliver value and savings in real estate and acquisition and technology and other mission support services across government. Additionally, for our real estate portion, we provide workspace to over 1 million federal employees, primarily with courthouses, land ports of entry, and federal office buildings. And we're ranked as one of the largest holders of real estate in the U.S. We design, we build, we manage, we lease federal buildings, U.S. courthouses, warehouses, and as I mentioned, land ports of entry. So I work in GSA's Office of Federal High Performance Green Buildings. This is a policy office that advances federal building innovations and planning, design, and operations to reduce costs. We enable agency missions. We enhance human health and performance, which is what I'm going to talk with you about today, and we minimize environmental impacts. I have several roles in that office. One of them is to promote the use of circadian effective lighting in our design and operation of federal buildings through pilot projects and through policy. And ultimately, what we have been working on with the Mount Sinai and the Lighting Health and Research Center is research that we're hoping to get into professional practice at the federal level.
Okay, so before we talk about that research, again, I'm intrigued when I think about the Federal High Performance Buildings Group. I didn't know there was such a thing. And how many high performance buildings are there?
This office of ours was founded in 2010. It's actually Congress enacted it in the Energy Independence and Security Act, an energy law. And for GSA, we have hundreds of high performance green buildings. A lot of that work actually started from a lot of construction we did in the late, 2000s, in 2009 through 2013, really looking at ways to make a building more energy efficient, conserve water, have great indoor environmental quality, use environmentally friendly materials, that kind of thing. It's green in the sense of environmentally friendly as well as financially friendly. We are a public agency, so we're really looking at ways to reduce the amount of energy that we're consuming in our buildings, as well as a lot of ways to reduce the amount of money we're paying, for that energy consumption. So it's sort of green in both ways and really trying to reduce the amount of money that we're spending on our buildings. And so sustainability is a great way to do that.
Sure. Well, tell us a little bit about your work with Mariana Figueroa and what you guys, some of the research that you have found regarding circadian effective lighting.
We kind of got into this work because we realized that research in buildings has mostly concentrated on eliminating risks inherent in buildings. So, looking at ways that we can mitigate asbestos and, get rid of mold, of course, and lead-based paint. But research really hasn't necessarily looked at buildings as a way to enhance and promote human health, up until recently, even before COVID. Over the past several years, we've been working to better understand the connections between lighting and health at work, specifically light's impact on people's sleep-wake patterns at night, which impacts their day at work. It impacts their daytime alertness and as well as their mood. And our overall goal is to identify specific health benefits of lighting practices that can be replicated in not only new buildings that we may build, but also existing buildings now, so that we can achieve innovative, cost-effective ways that we can improve employee health and well-being at work. GSA, as I mentioned, is a rather large real estate entity. We have a tremendous opportunity to find ways that we can enhance the health and well-being of people working in our buildings. So we entered this partnership with Dr. Figueroa and the Lighting and Health Research Center to take a look at, what are the ways that lighting really impacts people while they're working at work. And we focused first on day lighting, and then we sort of moved from there into electric lighting and then tunable lighting. But we conducted this research in 3 different phases. And the first phase is really focused on those, a set of federal buildings that we identified that we own that had day lighting as sort of the central design component of the building itself. And so a few of these buildings were newly constructed, and one just had a recent renovation. And then we looked at also some control buildings that, are more typical of what a federal building is, which is honestly a rather large but boxy building that has, a deep core of the building. So somebody may be sitting, really far away from the window. And so we're trying to figure out, what does a typical federal building look like versus what are, newly constructed buildings. And I'll say that this research was intriguing on many levels. But first, it was really, it showed us where, how people interact at work. One of the things that we realized is that, we really wanted to get empirical data on light exposure of people while they're working. And we realized, people are not at their desks all the time. In fact, they're moving around quite a lot, whether it's different meetings or going to get coffee or interacting with people in the hallways. It was really important for us to sort of get a better understanding of what type of light people are exposed to throughout the day. So we were able to get a lot of participants in these federal buildings that basically allowed us to map their lighting exposures over a week. And so they wore a light meter around their neck. We had light meters throughout the workspace that took measurements on the type of light that was present in the space, both day lighting as well as electric lighting. And then these same participants, they filled out subjective questionnaires measuring sleep quality at night, how long a person slept, how much caffeine they took throughout the day, what their general mood was at that time, what their energy levels were. And the interesting thing is that what we found is that people that were exposed to a lot of light, whether it's day lighting or electric lighting, they slept better at night. They had less sleep disturbances. They actually tended to get more sleep during the night, which was great. They were happier during the day. They were in better moods.
And again, this is self-reporting. They're self-reporting whether they're happing.
They're self-reporting that they are happy. Correct.
In a good mood. They're self-reporting their number of hours of sleep.
Correct.
Was there any?
Well, I'll take that back. They're self-reporting on a questionnaire. However, we were gathering data. These same participants were wearing the same light meter, but just on their wrist, and that measured the movement during the night. So we could actually tell when that person was starting to stir and get up. And so we kind of had a beginning of sleep and ending of sleep measurement.
Did you notice any discernible difference when they had artificial electric lighting or natural day lighting?
Well, I would say in the first phase of our work, we didn't necessarily focus on the difference between electric lighting and natural lighting. In our later stages, we focused actually more on electric lighting just because the first phase showed us that, even in these well daylit buildings, people were not getting a lot of natural light, or they weren't getting a sufficient amount. And that was due really to just where they were sitting in the building, how the furniture layout was, with the finishing colors, of the furniture and the walls and the floors and whatnot. So they weren't getting as much natural light as we thought. And so the second phase of our study focused more on, buildings and workspaces that did not have a lot of natural light. And that was really because as federal agencies, each agency has a different mission. And each agency really has a different way of doing work, and just depends on what they're doing. So, for instance, you may have a medical facility that has offices that are in the interior of the building with no access to windows at all, whether that's through HIPAA reasons or just the building layout itself. So there's really a lot of instances where people are just not getting enough daylight. So when we did the second phase focused on electric lighting, we were able to basically use supplemental LED lights in people's offices at their desktops. So, the importance was really trying to get that light into a person's eye. And we found similar results to daylighting in that people who solely had electric lighting were able to exhibit the same characteristics in terms of better sleep at night, better alertness during the day, happier, moods, with just electric lighting. And we did this. The unique part of this experiment was that this was actually done in 4 different building types, one in DC, one in Vermont. So we try to focus on sort of a northern, location in the U.S. And then we were given an opportunity with the State Department to travel over to Eastern Europe as well as to Iceland during the wintertime to take a look at buildings that, and these are 2 embassies, that had, insufficient daylight just because of the building itself, but then in an area of the world where in the wintertime, you're only getting 4 or 6 hours of daylight a day as it is. And we found the same results that, with supplemental LED lighting at people's desktops, they were still able to sleep sufficiently at night, better moods during the day, better alertness during the day. And that's really unique, just because these are, 4 different, and again, we were doing the same thing with people wearing the light meters during the day and self-reporting, but still the light meters showed us that, at night people were getting, better sleep versus when they were not having, this supplemental lighting.
Bryan, can you quantify it? You're saying better sleep, happier, better moods. Is it by a factor of 1%, 10%? Can you give us a feel for the?
I think off the cuff, it's probably it's probably at 10%. People were tending to sleep 45 minutes longer per night.
That's huge.
Based off.
That's huge.
And it's an easy, really, if I were to approach anybody on the street, saying, hey, would you like to sleep more at night? Then you need more light during the day. I think a lot of people would be on board with that.
Okay. Now you said Eastern Europe. Whereabouts in Eastern Europe? I'm just curious.
So Latvia, we worked with the U.S. Embassy over in Latvia, in Riga. So during the wintertime when we were there, on average, they were getting about 6 hours of daylight during the day. Typically in that top part of the world, it's also rather cloudy during the wintertime too. So it's muted daylight.
Okay. So GSA has collected now all this data and you understand. Now what do you do with it?
It's a good question. So, and that's sort of, the fun part is collecting the data, right? It's making the connections, the roll up the sleeves, hard work, get things done is getting that research into practice. There's a couple things here that we have worked on. We worked with Dr. Mark Ray from Mount Sinai on a task group with UL to help develop design guidelines for circadian effective lighting for daytime office workers. What was missing is we have research done by us and a lot of other scientists as well, looking into connections between lighting and health in buildings, but there was really missing a roadmap, giving a lighting designer or a decision maker a way to operationalize how to get, these connections into a workspace and how to improve lighting. So that design guideline was published, I want to say in 2020, and is really, a good, the WELL standard also has, the WELL building standard also has, circadian lighting feature, which is another, great roadmap as well. So these tools really are enabling our organization as well as others to, to do this type of work more. One of the things that GSA has, since we design and construct and manage buildings is, we have a facility standard for public buildings. It's called the P100. And the P100 establishes these design standards and performance criteria for our buildings. It contains policy and technical criteria that, we use when we're doing programming for a building or designing and really documenting the evolution of the building itself. One of the things that we were lucky to have happen is that the P100 itself was revised last year, and we were able to get citations to this new design guideline, as well as a couple of other metrics to help designers, or really require designers, to think about lighting and health in their design for buildings. It has not really happened before in GSA, and so this was a tremendous opportunity. We knew really in order to gain traction for our projects and our buildings, both existing buildings as well as new construction, that we really needed to embed this into our design requirements. And so the way that P100 works is you have sort of a baseline where everybody is supposed to design a building at a certain criteria, and then there's different higher performing tiers that go to tier 1, 2, and 3. Currently, right now, we have a building that is going to be designed at a tier 2 would need to have used the new design guideline by UL. Our goal is to see if we can try to lower that tier level just so we can get more projects, to really start to use this more and more. But I would say that, the research that we did with the Mount Sinai Lighting Health and Research Center was a good, baseline for the data that went into the design guideline. And I think that's something that, at least for our organization, is going to really help us do more of this type of work in our projects.
Well, I'm interested in this. First of all, the P100, I was not familiar with that document, and you've got the different tiers. So a new building is going up. They're going to design it toward tier 2. So they would incorporate the information that you have learned here. Then once the building is complete, does someone come in and, quote, certify it that it is P100 tier 2? How does that work?
It's a good question. And so, right, part of the design process is, GSA would have a requirement, saying that we want this building for X agency, to have these certain criteria, right? And so if it's a tier 2 building, throughout the building, that's sort of part of the contract with the designer and then the constructor, is they have to meet certain criteria. So in order to ensure that the building is completed and the project is finished, part of that process throughout the entire design into construction is that the project manager would go back and work with the designer as well as the general contractor to ensure that the building is meeting those requirements.
Okay, understood. Now, you mentioned GSA has over 1 million employees. How many square feet do you have? Do you know?
So GSA itself, I would say, probably has about 10,000 employees, but we house employees throughout, other agencies, so over 1 million. I want to say that we have over 360 million square feet of space throughout the country, and that's roughly split 50-50 in terms of the buildings that we own and then the buildings that we lease.
Okay, so you are one of the largest landlords, for lack of a better word, in the country.
Correct.
And you carry a big stick. And the fact that you're doing this really will help the entire office community. Is the P100 available where non-GSA institutions can use it?
The P100 is available on our website. It's free to download, free to use. I think the website is gsa.gov/P100. We try to keep it easy. But it is free to use, and I know there are lots of entities that at least have heard of it. I can't speak to whether or not they use it, but this is a standard that, has evolved over the years. And it's in a regular revision process. So when, for instance, when a new law requires buildings to be more energy efficient, or new requirements come down, that's part of the process of revision. We need to ensure that we're meeting federal requirements as promulgated to us by Congress. So that way we're striving to make better and better buildings.
So you were part of the UL task group that developed the design guideline for promoting circadian entrainment with light for day active people. What was that like?
Yeah, for this task group, it was rather unique. They assembled people that were sort of users of lighting standards, academia. I think the Department of Defense was also a member of the same task group. We were brought in really because we had done some of the research in office buildings, because this was specifically targeting office buildings for people that work during the day. So that was sort of our unique role in that we were sort of living this research, being more or less guinea pigs and trying to figure out what the connections between lighting and health were. I would say it was really great to be a participant on this group, just to really hear all the different perspectives in terms of what's the best way to develop something that can be usable by people of all backgrounds, not just researchers, not just members of academia, but practitioners in the field. And that, for me, was one of the benefits of being involved on the task group itself.
Are there other areas in light and health that GSA is interested in, such as UV or germicidal?
That's a great question. I think that's a very, opportune question. Just, one of the focuses that we have as, owners of real estate and managers of buildings, we haven't been in our buildings in a couple of years. And so now is really the time where we're starting to all go back to work. In our P100, we do require using UV lighting on all of our central air handling unit cooling coils. It's a standard practice. I would say, though, in terms of other areas related to lighting and health, one of the things that we're trying to really get a better grasp of is lighting and health, and then include energy use in that as well. Lighting and health is a rather new concept for us, as I just mentioned, with its inclusion in the P100. One of the things I think we're trying to figure out, though, is does better lighting for human health, does that come at an energy cost? Does that come with a higher energy cost? We hope the answer is no, but that's something that we have to measure. We haven't necessarily sort of taken that out of the measurement, or taken that cost out of the equation just yet. That's work that we're starting to work on now. One of the other things that's unique to GSA is because we're such a big holder of real estate throughout the country, is, as I mentioned, with lighting and health, we have a big opportunity, but we have a big opportunity in other areas as well. And so GSA has a green proving ground where technologies are tested before being deployed into the field. And so with lighting, they've looked at advanced lighting control systems for light level tuning, for occupancy sensing, for daylight harvesting. They've also looked at integrated daylighting systems to reduce lighting energy consumption, by using natural light to offset electric lighting in perimeter workspaces. We've seen that in many of the buildings that we did our work in. We had to take measurements around the perimeter to see how much the lights were being dimmed throughout the day, just depending on the amount of daylighting coming into the buildings. This is the type of work that intrigues GSA. I mean, I think we have a fairly robust research portion of GSA in terms of, we have buildings. We need to make sure that we're including technologies that are energy saving, but also technologies that will promote, human health of people working in our buildings. As I mentioned, I think human health is top of mind of people coming into the buildings now. Focused on ventilation, of course, but lighting shouldn't be left out of that equation. I think the other side of the coin, though, is that, not everybody is coming into buildings as much. I think there's great opportunity now for people to work remotely, to work from home or work from other places. And so I think another aspect of our work is really providing the education to people who are working from home, and what can they do in their home office, to receive the same benefit as people that are going into, office buildings, a couple of days a week, whatever. I think there's a great opportunity there to show how you can do this at home, how you can do this in a different working environment that was atypical, of federal employees, but really, all employees really, over the last 2 years.
Okay, well, Bryan, thank you very much. And we will now open the floor to questions from our audience. I would like to introduce our producer, Allison Thayer, and Allison will be monitoring the questions. Allison, take it away.
Thank you so much, Randy. And thank you, Bryan. It was a great interview. Very interesting stuff. Getting a lot of questions already in the chat and a couple in the Q&A. So I'll combine a couple, one from Dennis and one from Anonymous. They had to do with about electric lighting and what exactly this electric lighting, the qualities of it to make this lighting better in the office. So talking about directionality of the light, color temperature, spectral power distribution, and also how do you make it so that there's not as much glare in the eyes. So what are those considerations when going into the design?
Sure, and these are all great questions. I'm watching them come in live, which is great. So the light that we use to do the research was actually built in-house by the Lighting Research Center, or sorry, the Lighting and Health Research Center. Basically contained 3 strands of LED lights within a housing unit. The lights themselves were calibrated to emit a circadian stimulus of 0.3, and they were placed directionally either behind the monitor, sort of on a stand, so that the lights were pointed at a individual's eyes, or they were placed kind of tilted up, either at the side of their monitor or some other location on the desk where that individual is going to be looking at more directly. And really the point was just to ensure that light was getting into that individual's eyes. In terms of what the SPD was, or I'm trying to find the question now, I'm sorry, the color temperature. Again, I'll have to defer to my more technical colleagues at the Lighting and Health Research Center, but I would say that, again, it was calibrated to try to be as powerful as possible in terms of the the circadian stimulus it was emitting. We tried 2 different scenarios, one with more of a bluish tint, of course, so, a higher Kelvin rating versus also more of a white output of the light, which tended to have more glare, of course, than the white, more glare than the blue, since of course the blue is going to be a little bit less intense because it was emitting more blue light, therefore more circadian stimulus is really being provided to that particular occupant. I would say just with the people that participated in the studies, I think more people tended to enjoy the blue light versus the white light. And again, there was no manufacturer that was involved. This was really done just as a test case. And so everything was kind of, built in-house with materials that were available.
The next question from Catherine, I think is really nice. We want to hear from the audience too. So Randy, do you mind unmuting Catherine?
I was just questioning, Bryan, if you had any insight on how to balance the requirement for more wattage to be able to actually get to the CS metrics as put forth by the UL document, because in our studies we're finding it competes with our goals for having to be able to meet the energy code.
Yeah, that's a really good question. It's something that we'll be doing some more work into, try to measure the type of lights that we're using in spaces and try to disaggregate how much energy we're using in order to provide that additional circadian effective lighting to that individual or to the space itself. So it's something that we haven't fully grasped yet. I will say, really one of the things that we really learned is, for us, it's really natural light first. So it's really making the case to incorporate as much daylighting as we can in our new construction projects, which we don't have, a lot of those. However, we have a fairly significant amount of existing buildings that are, over 50 years old, buildings that were, warehouses or built for different purposes that we have converted into office buildings. And so those are sort of the projects that, we're kind of constrained with the amount of lighting that's coming into a deeper core of that building. So this is where we really started looking more at, using supplemental electric lighting to really enhance the lighting quality of that space. So I don't have an answer at this point. It's something that we are looking at a project out in Colorado to use submeters and really try to get down to how much more energy this is really using, up and above the code. I will say this particular project, though, is going to have a pretty significant advantage because the project itself is aiming for net zero energy. So, that's going to be really key in order to ensure that it still meets that project goal.
Great. And kind of along those same lines, a question from Z about Lightbox. How long do you say an office worker should have this lighting on per day?
So what the recommendations that we have been telling at least our customers and people internally within GSA is really, if you don't have a light box or anything like that, try to sit somewhere bright for 2 hours in the morning at least, or 3 hours if you can. What we're finding and what we have found, at least in our work, is that really receiving that high circadian effective lighting in the morning really does a great job to entrain, your circadian rhythm throughout the day. So you're sleeping better at night, and you're more alert, and you're performing better during the day while at work. So 2 to 3 hours in the morning, if you can. A lot of, I will say, we haven't been in buildings in the last few years, right? So at least from the federal side, we just started going back into our buildings within the last couple of weeks, at least on the GSA side. And so because of that, we're still trying to relearn, how we're sitting in buildings. So if we're able to sit, outside or, by a bright window in the morning, that's really what we're recommending.
Okay. My question was, and thank you, Bryan, for the great presentation. I'll just read my question. This is great that the GSA is leading the way in lighting and health, as we always realize that from the initial LED SSL work that the government has done. But what I wanted to stress is, of course, is about walk the walk and talk the talk. So are the findings and realizations and requirements of this ongoing project being entrenched, I mean, absolutely entrenched into the government procurement specification and tendering process unequivocally? I remember learning about the process at a conference of the day that I wrote about in Providence, and it was quite an interesting process. But so my question is, is it entrenched when you finalize what you're doing and what you recommend? Will it be that way?
So thanks for your question, Bryan. For projects that are having to meet requirements of GSA's building standards for public buildings, which is the P100, if it's a project that, and I know there's another question in here about what tier 2 means, so I'll kind of answer both of these if I can. So each different project, you have, you can meet baseline requirements within the P100, or you can go up to a tier 1 or a tier 2 or a tier 3. It's much like what building rating systems do for, for instance, green globes, 1 globe, 2 globes, 3 globes, and LEED,
Mm-hmm.
Silver, platinum, et cetera. So a tier 2 is a building that's going after a higher performance rating. So to answer your question though, Bryan, specifically, if a project is seeking a tier 2 designation within the P100, it would have to go through the design guidelines themselves from UL 24480. And that's part of the procurement process itself. So they would have to ensure all their lighting systems that they're using would be able to supply enough circadian stimulus or EML in that space of that building for occupants to have that circadian effective lighting. It's not across the board yet. So for instance, if a project was just going through the baseline requirements of the P100, it's not a requirement yet. Part of the purpose of doing this talk, of course, is to provide education information on what we're doing, but providing sort of an education to those project teams is an important next step to alert them to what the new requirements are within the P100, but also inform them and provide some background on what this UL design guideline is, how to use it. And the hope is to sort of lower that that requirement down from a tier 2 to maybe a tier 1 and eventually get into a baseline. So we're trying to do our best to provide that education, provide that support so that we can ensure that this is going to be in projects, moving forward. I can't say, of course, how long this is going to take, but that's the process that we're approaching it right now.
So due to the scientific nature of the experimentation, a temporary CS3 LED fixture was used as opposed to renovating the architectural light fixtures. Makes sense. Any plans to do more testing with architectural luminaires such as pendant lights?
So currently, we personally at GSA do not have plan. Well, I take that back. So we're starting on a pilot, as I mentioned, we're starting on a pilot project in a building in Colorado. That is, it's a renovation of an existing building, but the project itself is aiming to meet some pretty significant sustainability goals project wide. So I'm not aware of what fixtures they're using. They have incorporated the design guideline into the project's design. Construction has not started yet because the design is not 100% complete. So I'm not aware of what they're choosing yet. In terms of are we evaluating architectural lighting, such as pendants or otherwise? Personally, we're not. That being said, others might be. We really went through this project or this research rather, just to take a look to see what the connections of lighting and health were in office buildings. It wasn't necessarily a proving ground to look at different lamp styles or certain manufacturers, because there's a lot out there, of course, and we're not trying to pick winners and losers. We're really just trying to see and showcase that this can be done in an office building where people are in the office for 10, 11, 12 hours a day. And again, one of the reasons that we wanted to look at different geographic locations, not only in North America, but in Europe as well, is just where they are on the planet, of course, is going to dictate how much daylighting they're receiving. So in some of the studies that we did at embassies over in Eastern Europe, they're receiving light for roughly 4 to 6 hours a day. So it was important to us just to prove the concept that providing supplemental lighting is really important for people. So we did focus more on the plug-in supplemental lighting. We did do a project, a follow-up project rather, looking at a dynamic lighting solution in an embassy, but the results of that project are a little inconclusive due to some various challenges that we came across during the project that were not related to the lights. It was more COVID for one, and then some other challenges along the way too. So we did not really receive statistically significant data to really sort of back up how people were responding to those types of lights.
And in terms of these lights, you talk a bit about daylight, which is more or less free to get in a sense, but not all office spaces are able to get this daylight, which you've also talked about. So when you're talking about these task lights or the overhead lights, what do you and GSA deem as appropriate in terms of a price point for these? Like, what do you think?
We, currently, of course, we're not mandating anybody do any kind of purchasing of task lights, in our policies. One of the things that we're learning, though, in our projects, not only in these bigger ones that I've been talking about, but some of the smaller retrofits, is the two things that are really value engineered out of the projects tend to be lighting and acoustics. And that's just the way it's been, unfortunately. That's really the biggest part of my job and others' job within GSA, is really to educate the designers and project leads on why lighting is so important and why it really should not be cut. We haven't got into discussions and pricing on what that looks like from a price point perspective, or at least what we're recommending a price point be. It really has to be part of the entire project, of course. And that's really where we're trying to advocate as hard as we can to the project teams. Please don't take this out of your project. This is why it's so important. Here's empirical data to back this up. And oh, by the way, if you receive enough lighting while you're at work each day, you tend to sleep better and longer at night. So that right there is a good selling point, just to ensure people really understand that this does work. It does make sense. We really should be doing this more and more in our buildings.
That's a great point. I agree fully with you, Bryan. CJ, you're up next for the next question.
Sure. It sounds like the supplemental electric lighting scenario that you described was a task-based solution, which is logical from the standpoint of getting the most light actually into the back of your retina. There are a lot of manufacturers out there that are touting more ambient lighting strategies, which simply aren't going to be able to get the lux required to the destination that it needs to hit. And from an energy use perspective, these task-based scenarios are just going to be much lower consumption. It seems like making that point clear would be really useful. And I didn't know if, from the standpoint of your education of the entities that you're trying to espouse the benefit of light and health, if just having this point be driven home a little bit more, that these task-based solutions are the most beneficial, just because we get inundated in the marketplace from a design perspective by these companies that are trying to put forth scenarios that probably won't be as is helpful. I'm wondering maybe if the P100 could define this in the future, or if you have any thoughts on this. Thanks.
Yeah, that's a great point. So I think the P100 itself is a building standard that we developed and we use, of course, and it is revised routinely. I believe the last revision, which where we included requirements for circadian effective lighting, just occurred late last year. That being said, it is a process of continually being revised. I definitely appreciate your feedback. I think there'll be additional feedback from others, as well as, project teams are using the P100 and, going after a tier 2 and using this design guideline to help us really improve or better define rather, what we're seeking in our project requirements. But your point's well taken. We're just not at that stage at this point, but it's definitely feedback for us to do a better job on clarifying, this point within the P100. There's other points as well. The P100 itself the latest revision was pretty significant because there are lots of other areas within the standard that did need more clarification.
The lighting codes offer LPD exceptions for certain zones and usages. So based on the health impacts that these guidelines have, can we be one step closer to getting these in the codes?
Great question, Rebecca. So a lot of part of the reason that our office exists within the federal government is to participate on other standards and codes. We do participate in many of the codes, especially in ASHRAE codes, and not so much IES, although our partners in the General Services Administration's Public Building Service, they do participate in IES code development. Yes, I think that's really part of our role, again, is the educational component, it's the advocating component, is to be a part of those discussions as code bodies and task groups are meeting, really trying to, again, inform people on the results that we're finding and making the case to have codes, updated where we can, and just continuing to try to, make the pitch to have codes consider our findings and change, how things are being done, because we can certainly do things better.
Okay, Bryan, thank you for that. And we do want to go ahead and wrap up now. Bryan, I would like to thank you for being our guest and for the valuable information. We want to thank our producer, Allison. You did a tremendous job, as you always do. We want to thank the audience because we had great questions and great feedback this time. And then last, we want to thank our sponsor, Ledvance. Now, we will publish this complete video with the questions, and that'll be published later this week. And then the last thing we do is just want to remind you about 23 May, Dr. Frigario, Skip the Nap, Consolidating Sleep for Older Adults. We hope to see you then. Thank you all.